I really appreciate you being here with me on the Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation podcast. For folks who are unfamiliar with you and in the work that you do, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Kate Stoddard. I am an Idaho native. I have a business called Orchestra Provisions, and we are working to confront global food security and combat hunger as well as the environmental demise that our food systems are causing.
I appreciate that. And if we could start, I'm wondering what has drawn you in particular. Like, what do you think about you has drawn you to doing work that addresses such important issues in the world?
Yeah, it's interesting that the way that you worded that because it's what about me? And oftentimes I'm talking about, oh, well, in grad school, I was doing a lot of really interesting research about iron deficiency anemia and so on and so on. Or, I have worked as a river guide for 15 years and I have this huge connection with the natural world. But ultimately, I think it goes back to the very beginning and the parents that I chose to come into the world to. And both of them are very impact driven. They're very, I would almost say, strict to their values. And both of them, I would say, if they're not making their community a better place and imparting the world with, we don't have so much time here on this earth. So every minute matters. I think both of them feel a lot of fuel when they are imparting a legacy and making the world a better place. So I grew up in that narrative and I think it's just kind of natural for me to carry on that way of thinking. But I do kind of want to touch on exactly why the impact based business. And essentially, I'm not a business person, which makes me maybe more likely to be successful, I've learned, because people trained in business, they know that the levels of success on business are really low and that it's an insane amount of work. I have the naivete to kind of move forward with my impact in a business format and I think be successful. So yeah, the grad school thing is very important in the story because after I had been, I got my undergrad at Montana State University. And after that, I kind of moved into the wilderness and was a career river guide and still currently do a couple of trips, but the last 15 years. And I've seen a common thread with river guides where they get closer to about 30 years old and they realize, okay, I have to do something with this big experience, or I have to do something more that's bigger than myself with all these
Mm,
skills that I have. And they go back to school. And that's what I did. I went to grad school at the National University of Natural Medicine and got a master's in the science of nutrition. And that university had a really holistic perspective on the science of food, but also behavioral mechanisms for changing people's way to, use nutrition as a preventative form of healthcare, essentially. Food is really personal, right? It's like mother's love first and foremost, but it's as personal to people as religion and politics. And that's where I was kind of studying iron deficiency anemia. And I found a tribe in Africa that were vegetarian, but they had very few instances of a number one public health concern, iron deficiency anemia. And so I was kind of thinking,
mm.
like, what are these people eating? And turns out these Mopani worms is what they were eating. And they dried them out and they were incredibly shelf stable year round. And they were able to actually avoid this kind of nutrient deficiency. And further in that research, I saw that the UN and FAO had been advocating for, this is a food staple that could have a lot of impact in the world on a number of levels. So that is a long
Mm.
answer to your question, but I think it's all important.
I think it is too, and I'm curious. Then, Kate, what from that point, then diving into that subject matter to had you already eaten insects yourself of any kind, or was there a particular kind of monumental moment where you decided to try them, maybe crickets in particular, connecting to what your business is in now?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I ever did. I might have had like a chocolate covered cricket or something kind of more in the novelty realm. And of course,
Sure.
unintentionally eaten a bunch. And then I think like just for shock value out on the river, we would put salmon flies in our mouth and then just let our guests be talking and they'd turn around and you just sort of open your mouth and it would crawl out, and I think many times I was challenged to eat them, but it wasn't really like an enjoyable or conscious thing. So when I figured out that could be like a really monumental food staple, I was like, well,
Mm.
I'm the nerdy scientist that wants everybody to change their behaviors and start eating these bugs. So I had better, start walking the walk essentially. So at the time, there weren't a lot of food grade insects available at scale. I ended up ordering a plethora of different sorts of insects to put in my food in my cabinets. And I think I got crickets, grasshoppers. Let's see, I maybe a beetle, and I think there were a couple of others. And I put them in the pantry, and I was not wanting to ruin a meal. I'm a very food centric person and very active. I want to enjoy my food and I want it to fuel me, but I don't have a ton of time to be messing around with, potentially the risk of not liking it or not wanting to eat it. And so that
Mm.
became the problem, right? Is all right, well, if I am the one that knows that this should be a food staple and I can't bring myself to eat it, how in the world am I going to convince others to do the same? And it's not really fair to do that, right? So I think one day I went on a run and I was just thinking, all right, in every food story, generally somebody has a spice or a seasoning that they would add to, their meal, even if it's just salt or pepper. And it's the oldest trade and people know how to use them. They're pretty straightforward. So what if that was my first product is a seasoning blend because it would carry the cricket well. Cricket doesn't have a bad taste. It doesn't really have a descript taste. So it
Mm.
wouldn't affect the dining experience and people wouldn't even really know if they weren't conscious of it. So that's kind of how the product line started is because of my own, I would say, aversion to eating insects. And then I started kind of using those and I was like, oh yeah, this is it. It's insects as ingredients. It doesn't have to be so scary as people think, on Survivor when they make it such a big deal to eat a bug, right? Well, like there are many things on our food labels today that we can't even pronounce. We don't know what they are. They might not even be great
Mm.
for us because of whatever they're trying to accomplish, whether it's to absorb moisture or make it tasty or whatever it is, a preservative. Cricket is a whole food, right? So why wouldn't we add that to the ingredient list if we're not compromising experience?
That leads me into a question I have as to what are you advocating for as the ideal end result? I'm thinking about it in the context of a plate, a dinner plate with what you have on it. The insects as some component of the meal, where does that fit in? Is it a substitute completely for what might be like the primary protein, meat, for example? Or in your vision, in specifically the work that you do, is it something that's a substitute on a sometimes basis, or what sort of frequency, or does it take over the whole food system? What's the end result that you're aspiring to for insects?
Our food systems, there isn't one solution. I don't think that crickets alone or even insects alone are going to save the world on the level we need saving, right? But I do think that they could be a really crucial piece to the puzzle. So, any amount of food, this is kind of one of the philosophies I learned in nutrition school. If you're asking people to eat something good, instead of telling them not to eat something that is less good, whether that's for personal nutrition or the environment, if they will just eat that good thing in that positive way, they're going to have less space in their belly for other things. So, on a very simple level,
Mm.
any little bit of it that you eat is going to have an impact. It's going to have an environmental impact and a health impact. I don't want to exclude anybody from this food story. I personally really enjoy a nice burger from time to time, and I think like we've seen, meatless Monday or something. Even that one day of people changing their behaviors can have great impact. So I'm not an extremist, even though it kind of feels like I am when I talk to people because they're like, well, she's preparing for the end of time. She wants us to eat bugs. It's not really like that at all. I just want to provide an alternative that can have a great impact. I can't do it alone. It's not the only thing that's going to work. But on that note, I think that there are several ways people can be active in this, right? If it's just using those spices, you're going to add value to something that normally doesn't have protein or heme iron or calcium. So all of a sudden, your spices become a superfood. Are you replacing a beef steak? No, not at all. But over the course of the day, if you're using the spices, you might add up to what equates to a protein serving, right? You pretty easily you would. You're not going to replace all protein by using spices. Be clear on that.
Mm.
The protein powder is super exciting because you absolutely can meet your daily needs, but at least the protein serving pretty easily. So yeah, maybe some days you are substituting and you're going cricket based protein, and maybe just incorporating it as a supplement will also be super impactful.
Hmm. So really it's that sort of alternative protein taking up some sort of slice of the pie that exists and
Yeah,
replacing
and
some quantity of the calories that you might consume.
right, yeah, and I look around at space and it's super popular right now, right? Alternative proteins. Crickets have, the nutritional value essentially of a steak, of beef, without the environmental impacts. And also, it's a lot easier and more friendly, less inflammatory to the body. It's a whole food. It doesn't even need to be processed really, other than grinding it up, milling it. I look at kind of the, what do we call it, artificial meat market now. And I'm thinking, my goodness, is this sustainable? And then you start reading about it and you're like, well, these are all these things that take a lot of energy to produce. And maybe in the long run, it's actually not sustainable at all. And it mimics meat, but
Hmm.
it's not really a food that we evolved to digest or absorb. It seems really silly. It's like a whole bunch of different processes that require energy. And here we have the crickets low at the food chain. They reproduce quickly and efficiently, and they meet all sorts of nutritional needs that we have. So, in that way, I hope that people can kind of open their minds and just see this makes so much sense. And traditionally, in our food story, most humans come from genetic lines that used this as a food staple, not only in absence of other proteins, but just as a main food staple. And it has been hypothesized by some scientists that this is one of the reasons why we evolved so efficiently because of our ability to forage for this protein source in absence of other protein, but also one of the
Mm.
reasons why our brains grew so big because of our ability to forage for this really high fatty protein source of food. So super interesting stuff.
Definitely, and I'll want to touch on that once again. But as we're talking about this whole spectrum of the food industry, I think there is this thing that you can look from, I guess, the outside in and see a business like yours with the mission that it has, um, and think that it's all insects and nothing else as a protein source for one. That can just be some sort of assumption, but I think that it might be important to talk about maybe the spectrum a little bit of for example, there's a major difference between perhaps very conventional, traditional uh, um, factory farming, and how animals are raised and treated, versus maybe what's happening a bit more as of late with the regenerative agriculture movement. For one, I think that those are way different ways in which we can interact with meat and animals in the food system potentially. But I'd be curious to hear: is there something similar in the space of insects that you see, or that might start you might foresee happening in the future, something along that spectrum of like there's going to be different ways in which insects are raised and cultivated for the sake of food.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't even know where to start with this one, but um, essentially, it has been kind of a novelty industry up until now. But we do have a lot of information on how to farm insects, especially because one of the ways that we've been farming them is for pet food industry, right? The
Mm.
rest of the animal kingdom knows that this is like an most excellent food source. So we do have that, but there are problems in the industry with the scaling. And all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, you can see people are joining in the conversation. All right, we should eat crickets. Well, now it's kind of this like, let's fund this to get bigger, right? So that we can actually feed the world. That's what we're trying to do. Insects are super interesting in the regenerative agriculture space. They are
Mm.
very efficient at converting feed into protein for human consumption. So they don't eat very much. They eat plant based matter, right? Leaves, grasses, that kind of thing. One of the really interesting, so the farm that I collaborate with, they use all food waste. So instead of that stream going to the landfill and creating more carbon emissions, the crickets love it. So for instance, like one example, cassava flour is very popular right now, especially for people who are gluten free, right? But the plant has a lot of fiber that we can't really digest. Well, the crickets love it. So instead of that becoming another waste stream, the crickets convert it into human feed. You're not cutting down the rainforest to grow soy or corn for cows, right? It's just already there. You don't need that much of it. And you're not growing feed for crickets. So that format, that blueprint is really exciting. In addition to that, their excrement is called frass. It's another product on the market to help rebuild topsoil. So it's really helpful in as a natural fertilizer. So, and then of course, on that topic, they require a fraction of the arable land, I said feed, and water as competing protein sources. And that includes plant protein. The cow thing, it's like we know, right? Plants, they require a lot of arable land and a lot of water. So, yeah, it's really exciting to have this protein source that has the nutritional profile of beef and also even more sustainable than plant protein. It's kind of like the perfect food in that way. And another thing I will say on the regenerative agriculture side is the ability for this to be a local protein source is very exciting, right? You could farm crickets indoor in Brooklyn and have a local protein source for a massive urban center. That's just cutting all sorts of carbon footprint out, right? Like going to the slaughterhouse, going to the packaging, all the way across the country and back to New York City. And then in addition to that, it's really exciting because it's kind of like this skill that we can teach people, right? So it's like you give whatever the person a fish, they have a fish for the night. You teach them how to fish, they have fish forever. These could be farmed at home for people that are really, have their own farm or kind of subsist off of the land in that way. So that's exciting because you can give the people a tool to raise their own protein source. And there was I'm going to misspeak here, but there were some Ivy Leaguers years back who did a project on this where they went and kind into kind of rural communities with people that were more agricultural but had problems with food access, and they built cricket farms together for them to be able to
Mm.
feed their families. So yeah, I'm obviously really excited at the potential there. It's pretty much a no brainer.
You mentioned way earlier saying that it's something of a piece to the greater puzzle. And that certainly seems to be true in that all these potential solutions as to how we might have a more sustainable food system, there's a lot of different solutions. And we probably should address, or we probably should utilize as many of them as are
Yeah.
feasible and make sense,
All of
right?
them. Yeah.
It's kind of an all hands on deck sort of situation here. So you are selling me, of course, the pitch here. I'm wondering why, Kate, why haven't we adopted this practice here of consuming insects in the U.S. and as well? Are there other places in the world that this is much more common? I mean, you mentioned earlier in the conversation already what spurred all your research was finding situations elsewhere in the world where people did rely on insects as necessary food sources.
Yeah, big question again. And some theories and some actual traceable reasons. This, as I said, yeah, is a traditional food staple for humans. And 2.5 billion people today have insects in their food story. It's a normal part of their diet. They tend to be people closer to the equator and also in rural communities that just never got separated from that reality. But also, I think closer to the equator is the reality that these are readily available year round, right? So as you travel further away from the equator, you have insects kind of coming in hatches and less frequently because of the cold weather. So as people started to travel out and move away from being nomadic people, 5,000 years ago, modern agriculture deems insects a pest, right? Something that is
Mm.
actually eating your crops. So we name them bugs. Even I have am struggling not to call them bugs, but what does that mean? They bug you. Like, do you want to eat something? that's a pest. No, not really. So our vernacular is a huge problem. And then there have been some cultural things that have happened. There are sort of written recordings of when Columbus came to Americas and him kind of using the indigenous people's diet as a tool to kind of make them other, different, less than. And one of the things he said was just look at them, they eat bugs, you know? And so that's something that kind of behavior, it still exists today. Sometimes you talk to people and it's like, how dare you suggest that I eat a bug? You know, about all these other options. It's threatening to people, that sort of vibe. But it remains the truth that, whatever, over 7 billion people now, and 2.5 billion people of them didn't get separated from that story. And in those communities, you're starting to see this movement where it has moved to urban centers. So in Thailand, it used to be kind of
Mm,
more just a rural thing. And now in the cities' markets, it's a very normal thing to see people eating insects in the food markets. And yeah, so that's an interesting thing. I will add that I feel like there's kind of this pivotal moment where if people don't want to talk about birth control and they're, triggered by that, they're going to have to start talking about how we're going to feed all of the people. And that's kind of the angle that I wanted to move into. It's like, all right, well, obviously I'm a woman and I believe in my own rights and all these kinds of things. But how do we kind of circumnavigate that hot topic and actually make these impacts of like, okay, well, if we don't want to do this, we're gonna have to do this. It's the either or. It's
mm.
kind of random for me to add
And
that,
so
but I think it's important.
I I think it's certainly a consideration. I mean, it's interesting the things that were apparently triggered on and not, So I think that's worth paying attention to. So, Kate, I'm imagining you have had a lot of conversations attempting to bring people towards this worldview that insects should be a part of. I like the phrase you used, food story, no matter the country, the place that they're in. I'm wondering, in your experience over these last few years advocating for this point of view, what have you noticed in conversation has kind of smoothed people out or opened them up a bit to be willing actually to try insects as food?
Yeah, this is kind of where the business stands right now. It's a
Yeah.
huge marketing puzzle again, a problem almost, is that everybody has their own motivations for or what's important to them, right? I think most everybody has it in them to get to that place, but it is always kind of like reading the room to see, okay, what is most important to this person? The common thread cross politics and socioeconomic status is that everybody's connected to the earth in some way, right? You've got people hunting out there, you have people recreating out there, we're all eating the food. So that tends to be kind of an easy go-to is talking about the environment, but I have noticed that first and foremost, people love to think that they're going to save the environment, but when it comes down to daily habits and rituals, they want to know how it's going to affect them personally right now today. So it's
Mm,
also a health proposition, right? So when I start talking about kind of comparisons of nutrient profiles, people are like, oh, wow, that's kind of incredible. I still don't want to eat it. But then I start talking about, okay, but check this popcorn with curry out. Like it's really tasty. And someone else walks by and they eat it and they are like, oh, wow, that's amazing. So definitely
mm,
sampling is very important as well, or kind of group mentality, right? Word of mouth, people talking and normalizing it on their own time. I think that there's also a general way of thinking. Some people are more closed minded, some people are more open minded. And there's probably a survival mechanism to that, right? I don't want to change people's mind that are completely adverse. I don't want to upset people.
mm,
I don't want to spend my time and energy and my stoke, most honestly, on people that just don't want to change their mind. That's not what I'm interested in doing. But when people are excited and inquisitive and curious, and maybe they're not sold, some people are instantly sold. I can convert those people very easily. And so taking that open minded spirit and running with that and perpetuating that energy is where I really try and focus my time and efforts and education, right? Because I'm talking about this all day, every day. When people are excited, getting them more excited, they spread the word and it kind of generates
Mm,
this movement and energy that converts people all on its own. It's kind of got a life of its own. So I think that's kind of an important
mm.
way of going about it, because the work of changing somebody's mind that is closed is futile and it's just a waste of your time.
And who are your early adopters? Who have they been?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of them, and kind of a diverse crew, right? I could say the Pacific Coast. Generally speaking, almost anybody from California, Portland, Oregon, outdoor enthusiasts, people who are connected to nature and want to conserve it, and they see what's happening. They want to like conserve that for future generations, have that as a legacy, but also it matters to them and they realize how connected we are. So a lot of kind of outdoor athletes are important, I think, because they also are normally pretty in touch with the fuel that they consume for their body. Getting up into the mountains, it requires good nutrition a lot of the time. So they're conscious about the health proposition and the environmental proposition. Health and wellness folks, vegetarians and vegans, interestingly, not all of them, but a lot of this
Mm,
plant based movement is fueled by environment, is fueled by inflammation. So if there's demographic of those people who are motivated by those impacts, they love the cricket protein because it has all the things they're missing from not eating that animal protein.
mm.
And then moms are a huge one, right? Like traditionally, we have been in the kitchen, maybe not as much nowadays, but we are traditionally the ones preparing the meal, feeding the family, going to the market. We have this way of having so much hope for the future and wanting to impart that hope with our children. And also, we care about what we feed our children and how they're growing. So, moms definitely continue to be a strong user base for us.
I think it overall is a really strong point that you make that might be most worth your energy to focus on the people who are already converted. I think there is definitely some sort of mental paradigm where we feel like we're fighting this uphill battle of just trying to convince people who see the world a completely different way than us. And there's a place for that. And that is a conversation that needs to be had. But as far as the work that we're doing, you can get so much benefit just because all of us who might be converted aren't necessarily organized as efficiently, as effectively as we otherwise could be, right? So starting there seems like you can move through a widespread amount of the population before trying to go to folks who may never see the point of view that you're searching for.
Yeah, and that's another kind of sparks another interesting topic, which is, all of my marketing and design and efforts right now are targeting kind of a more affluent, educated crowd, right? And that part
Mm,
of what I wanted to do is feed the world. Well, that's a very relatively small percentage of folks, right? And then it becomes this story where I'm trying to convert them so more money gets infused to the agricultural side, my business, et cetera, which is kind of an interesting philosophical quandary. But when I think about feeding the world, I think about how perfectly this food staple as a dried powder could be normalized and institutionalized in hospitals and
mm,
disaster relief and school lunch. I'm thinking really big supplement industry to confront nutrient deficiencies. And if I can get the people with the money on board to help scale this industry at large, all of a sudden it becomes a really viable storyline to be feeding people that need food and don't have food access. So it's hard sometimes to stay the course and remember that foot one foot in front of the other day by day. I think that I am
mm.
having an impact and have the potential to make a much larger impact. It's easy to have a hard day where somebody's like crickets. I mean, there could be people saying really hurtful things, or your mind just kind of goes dark one day and you have this kind of like, what am I doing, like what am I doing, trying to get people to eat bugs. And then that day passes and you realize like this is not all for naught, like you are on this amazing, beautiful, unique path. And you see the more often than not inspiring words or people contacting me from all parts of the world that are just inspired by the story. And that network is getting bigger and bigger, and people really do want to base their businesses and also their purchasing dollars towards something that means something that's bigger than themselves and that will be a lasting legacy.
Well, Kate, I'm curious then in those low moments, perhaps the days where you're feeling things are perhaps a bit more challenging than you'd like. I'm wondering what sort of habits, routines, or practices do you perhaps lean on to get yourself feeling again balanced, maybe re-inspired, or again energized towards working on what you're doing with orchestra?
So, in those hard days and hard spaces, sometimes I try and take a little bit of distance, have some deep breathing, get reconnected with nature, go out for a ski, go out for a run. I also am just like this incredible optimist where I know that even though I'm having these feelings right now, it's going to pass, and that like the negativity that can sometimes be targeted at what I'm doing or the skepticism, um, it's inciting this reaction in me that will pass. So
Hmm.
just remembering all of the positive things when, and how many more of those. It's like we all hear, right? A frown is like more muscles than a smile, and one negative thing can really take over your mind space, even if there are like 1,000 different positive things. So, and how do I get re-inspired? I mean, you can do a quick Google search, and just for me, I'm like total science nerd. I read some research and I'm like, oh my God, like a whole new marketing angle. I'm so excited. Look at just all of the people that are following me, and encouraged or inspired by me. That inspires me. Listening to podcasts that get my brain going just on business. We mentioned how crickets are yet another layer that are kind of hard to sell, right? Well, I've realized that in my own mind, I've made that out to be something way bigger than it is. Every business has a problem that they're trying to address, right? Why are crickets different than any other problem? They are not. And like we know now, right? 2.5 billion people, part of their food story. So it's not a unique problem. It's just another problem. And yeah, it has a few different aspects and challenges that I get to assess that are sort of unique, but it's just treating it like any other business, I think.
I love that. And you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that you've come to this business not being a business person, but you are more so a scientist, right? How how have you continued to, I guess, build up your business knowledge and acumen over time? Like what have you done and thought about that strategically to make sure that you're operating orchestra the way that it should be operated?
Yeah, I surround myself with people that know more than I do. And I make lots of meetings and time in my day to network and pick brains when people are willing to share and impart that information. I listen to how I built this all the time. It's not going to sound cliche, but I do believe I am getting a Harvard Business School degree through that podcast. It's like, even the ones that don't really excite me, when I listen to them, I'm like, oh, it's a problem I have right now, and I'm like, oh, well, these great ideas on
Mm,
how to overcome and just experience. I am realizing that I am the professional in my department, right? I am the expert. There are many business people that give me information that I just have to kind of let it shed off my shoulder because it doesn't apply in my certain situation, or it's coming
mm.
from, man that's kind of being a little condescending or whatever. So I'm also learning now at this point to take a lot of advice and then also take some of it with a grain of salt, because that's kind of one of my things is I'm a sponge, and everything everyone says I'm like, okay, cool, and I'm going to follow up on that and I'm going to do this, and you can't really do that either. And
Yeah.
also not all advice is good advice, right? So yeah, that's kind of how I've compensated, and I do feel like I have so much to learn still. I think having that attitude is very important, but I do feel like right now in the last 3 years what I've learned is incredible. I feel like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that I was running a business 3 years ago with the knowledge that I had then." So, yeah, it's been an interesting path.
Yeah, there's something about that slight feeling of embarrassment to reflect back on just a few years ago where you're like, "Ah, I knew nothing,"
Well,
you know, and then relatively to now, I've come so far. But one very interesting thing you mentioned to me, Kate, before we hit record is that while you've been working on orchestra for a few years now, it almost feels once again like you've hit day one. Part of that sounds a little bit like exhausting to me in one way, but maybe also exhilarating and exciting. Can you explain what you meant by that for folks listening in?
yeah, well, so I made the conscious decision to include a partner in orchestra. And that person actually is somebody I know through river guiding. So we're kind of this like Patagonia dirtbag story,
Nice.
really living our values and our storyline, right? He's amazing and he truly has made orchestra, it reinvigorated orchestra and revived it in a way because it has been a hard couple of years with all of the variables. So we had to, restructure the company as a corporation and a partnership, and that was a lot of work, actually, way more work than we thought it was
Mhm.
going to be. And but now we're kind of ready to hit the ground running. We also talk about being naive. When I started the business on the spice line, I had a really important mentor tell me this is never going to work. Off these spices because your profit margin is so tiny. You're gonna have to be McCormick's and scale and be in every grocery store. And I remember pulling my car over and just crying and be like, "I've worked so hard." And I didn't even think about that. Like, that is so, so stupid, right? Obviously, not coming at it from the business perspective. I'm coming at it from the, okay, I'm going to save the world. Who's with me? I don't even care if I get paid. So now I'm kind of like, no, I definitely need to get paid and I'm going to save the world with the money that I make. So we've launched this new protein line, protein powders, which has it's much better profit margin and business model. So we are kind of refocusing and have spent this last year in more or less a bit of an incubation phase where we weren't really focused on driving sales. We were just getting all of our ducks in a row. It's
Mm,
exhausting and a little bit, I don't want to say discouraging. It's been more hard days this last year. But now we have this amazing platform that we've never had before, right? We have like three product lines.
mm,
We have the marketing plan and a mentorship program in place, and just the ability. We have a fulfillment center and a co-packer. Like everything is automized and ready to go. So in that way, I mean, we've done so much work to where
mm.
like it's not like starting over. It's just a new beginning.
Yeah, that's a great phrase there. It can feel in the moments probably like it's 2 steps back in one way, 1 step forward, but the whole way through it, it was progress in the sense to
Yeah.
get you where you needed to be. Can you say more about the decision to take on a partner? How did like, where did that information come to you? What was that advice that you received, and, like, why did that just feel so paramount for the time that you were in with orchestra?
I have never been adverse to a partnership, and I've always been advised to be very careful and to just do it myself, right?
Mm,
I think on a really deep personal and spiritual level, I've always been a do it myselfer. And I'm to this point in my life where I'm about to break from doing it myself. And every everything like
mm,
and I've never been good at asking for help, and I'm just to a point where I got so beaten down energetically by everything and really myself taking it all on, where I'm like, okay, I want help. Like, we all know humans thrive in community. What am I doing? Like, it's this stupid Western idea of independence and self-sufficiency, right? Like, it's cool that I
mm,
can be that if I need to, but why would you do that if you didn't need to? And if we can grow and thrive and accomplish more together, why wouldn't we? And so I think all of the drawbacks of having a partnership, which is like I supposedly sharing and talking through problems, which are both things that I'm really motivated to do, seem very small in comparison to how much more we're capable of together. And so my idea is to attract people to orchestra that are growth centric, that want to talk through problems, that don't just shy away and shut down at conflict and don't care, I don't want to say like aren't motivated by money because that's really hurt me in the past. Um, but that it's like I want to do something that means something to me. And yes, I need to provide for myself, but I'm not greedy. And
Mm,
so definitely my business partner, Pepe Amadeo, he is like that ideal person and we work really well together. And then the core of really why I went that direction when I started it out by myself, I had tried on a few other partnerships that I didn't feel like were growth centric or in it for the right reasons, that were going to maybe drive the company in a direction that wasn't really true to the intention. Because that's really the most important thing to me is that wherever we get infused with money down the line or whoever joins our story, that the intention and the impact are a part of it. I would rather dissolve
mm,
orchestra tomorrow if it was going to be some sort of a self-serving mission that causes, more waste and doesn't have the impact than survive it with a bunch of money that drives it into, kind of a monster, I guess. Choosing Beppe was very conscious, and I know that our values are very aligned and that our goals are very similar and that we're willing to work really hard for those. And like I kind of mentioned before, I reached a point where I'm a single mom and I am working another job full time. And I have a lot going on. And I realized that orchestra was getting completely neglected and it wasn't realizing its full potential. And not only that, but it couldn't. It just couldn't because my
mm,
son is my number one priority. Right. I brought him here. I have like this incredible duty to like give him my all. And a part of that is showing him that I can be a successful businesswoman and that I am, able to provide for us and make a safe place for him and make a place where we can both be healthy and happy and have our basic needs covered. But in doing that, like I couldn't make orchestra fly. So it was a non-negotiable proposition. Like I needed Pepe's help. And it was pretty cool how organic it was because he was already in my path and he'd been super interested in orchestra and he kind of had just been like donating time to the cause. That's a cool thing about impact business is people are like, no, 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 seriously, don't pay me. I want to see you succeed. And you're like, I want to pay you so bad. But we're kind of working with us like that, where we're just like, oh my gosh, when we get to the point where we can just have all these amazing people surviving off of the business, it'll be a huge,
mm.
huge day. But yeah, so Bebe came into the path organically, and I think everything is just the way that it's supposed to be with the partnership. So I'm excited to move forward with Bebe.
That's wonderful, and I really appreciate you sharing. I think that's an important experience for others to get a look into, just because I don't imagine that that's an uncommon feeling of feeling quite overwhelmed with the proposition of building an impact driven enterprise, doing it yourself. And there is, I know a lot of people, especially who might be inclined to go down this route of creating something out of nothing their own. They might be some of those DIYers as you are. I know I share some of that sentiment myself. So very important that you share that with us. So thank you for that, Kate.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm curious to ask a bit about the product line with Orchestra. You started with the spices, as you mentioned. You have what you call therapeutics as well, and then now there's the protein powder. What stood out to me, one was how this differed a little bit than what I conceived of as eating insects, of like replacing the ribeye, grass fed ribeye steak on my plate with just kind of like a handful of roasted crickets or something.
Mhm.
Instead, your product line is much different than I would imagine and how that would fit into your diet. So I'm curious, what was the strategy, maybe profit margins aside, as to approach orchestra with these particular products starting out?
Yeah, and I would like to say that, I have a friend at gym and eat crickets, and she said, we don't give people enough credit. Like, I get people to eat whole crickets all the time. And I think it's important to have all of the products out there because those of you who are really willing to have the dried roasted crickets, like, yes, yes, yes. And the protein bars and all
Mhm.
of those things. I think it's great to have it all out there in the market. My strategy was to really get the people who are on the fence. Like they want to be there. They're a little ambivalent. They're kind of like, oh, I just can't. Like, I'm with you, Kate. The environmental piece, the health piece, like all of it. It makes so much sense. I just don't know. So the idea was just kind of like to tip those folks over into the market space. And so I have this. This is the protein powder bag here,
Awesome.
and it just looks like any protein powder. And I've had a lot of people tell me this is the best tasting protein powder I've ever had. Protein powder by
Mm,
nature is like kind of grainy and a little bit bitter. And oftentimes people add stevia to it. So then it's got this kind of like sweet, but not natural, even though stevia is natural taste to it. So the whole philosophy is whole food nutrition with us and like minimal ingredients. So the protein powders have four whole food ingredients: cricket powder, milled cricket powder, organic yellow pea protein, a tiny bit of date sugar, which is, of course, just the whole fruit, right? Dried and then made into sugar. So it also has a lot of nutritional add in, some more iron. Um, it's not super processed. And then flavor, whatever that is. And that's all from a natural whole food source. So the chai spice that I just showed you, that is all from spices: ginger, cardamom,
mm.
cinnamon. The vanilla is from vanilla powder, vanilla bean, right? Derived. And the chocolate is from Dutch cocoa. And so we're really using quality ingredients and very few of them. Mixing it with the organic yellow pea is very key, because not only is it more cost efficient, because cricket, right? Like we need to be able to scale it more to make it more cost efficient. It isn't super cheap. And it also makes it very familiar to people because people are really well versed with pea protein. So it's familiar. And yeah, we have, let's see, the vanilla, this is our most popular. And you'll notice our packaging, so conscious. Like I could not in good heart put another half empty plastic tub that's never going to degrade on the shelf, right? Like I feel like
Right.
this is for me has been a entry prohibitive piece of the market. I'm like, I'm not going to buy that container, especially if I'm rolling through it every month. Like I'm
Mm.
just not going to. But this paper-based packaging, I'm like, okay, and it looks super sexy on the shelf. Like it looks like nothing else on the shelf. People are like, wait a second, I don't have to do the plastic. And then have the chocolate here. And so yeah, our packaging has been a huge thing. It is not They do not make it easy to make it cost efficient and sustainable at the same time.
Mm.
So we're really proud of that as well. And then just show you kind of we use these metal tins, which may or may not stick around for the spices, but you can reuse them or refill them. And this is a curry and togarashi. We have 9 different flavors of seasonings. They're all, for the most part, they are all blends, so they're ready to go. I make a curry all the time where I just dump, 3 tablespoons or 2 tablespoons of the curry powder. You don't have to have multiple spices. So they're easier to use. The
Mm.
togarashi is really good to put in ramen. And then, yeah, we have all the other flavors you guys can check out. But the therapeutics, we're kind of targeting yet another market, which is like kind of health and wellness, or people who are really into medicine, kind of natural medicine. So we've got a Mayan cocoa, a golden milk, green vitality, which is kind of like your superfood greens, and then a crimson root, which is kind of beet, orange peel, cardamom, ginger, ashwagandha. And they all kind of have a system that they target in being nutritive or nurturing too. And those can, you
Mm.
can add them into baking projects or smoothies or just warm milk, kind of like a latte.
Well, as you say, and then the packaging is really well designed. I mean, and just looking through the photography on the site, there's really no reason why you wouldn't try your products to kind of get someone in the door on eating insects. Really beautiful and super compelling and attractive. So extremely well done there. Are there other products that we're considering at the moment, or might it just be continued variation on these existing lines?
Okay, this is kind of my classic like Kate thing where I'm like, oh, and then we'll do fruit leathers because moms are gonna love that. Protein and kids need protein, and we're gonna do supplements and we're gonna do all these things. So I have so many ideas, even just like backpacker food, adding the spices to that kind of
Mm.
thing. I think I've just had to kind of be like, okay, you know what? You need to like find out the efficiencies in the business and focus on what you have. Because what I accomplished in the
Mm.
first 2 years with 3 product lines and over, I don't even know, we have like 20 SKUs now, is that's actually a lot. And I should focus on growing that and making it a successful business before I just go crazy and start getting into, right now we are consciously in the dry mix sector of how they regulate things, which is different than if you add water. So the second that you add fruit or,
Mm.
get into protein bars or yeah, fruit leathers or any of that kind of thing, it becomes more expensive. And all of that is, time. Time is money. So right now we're going to stick with what we have and kind of get that out there because right now we find that when we reach people, they buy and we have subscribers, but we're not reaching that many people, right? The last year of kind of incubation. So the next year is going to be all about increasing our reach, targeted marketing efforts. In the future, like I said, hospital nutrition, the fruit leathers for the kids,
Mm.
and the opportunities are infinite. So I just encourage people to get into the space and help it grow. At this point, the more the merrier.
Excellent. Well, I'm along for the ride here. I'm excited to see where it goes. Before we wrap up, Kate, mind if I ask you a few rapid fire questions?
Yeah.
All right. So first one, for someone who might be interested in diving deep into the world of edible insects, what might be any sort of supplemental additional resources that you might recommend, even other organizations to check out, documentaries, books, or anything if someone's looking for a deep dive?
Yeah. There's a lot out there. Of course, orchestraprovisions.com. And we also have YouTube with some recipes on it. There is a national organization that kind of looks after the whole industry and advocates for it. Jiminy Crickets, I mentioned before, she has an amazing podcast that's all about teaching people how to farm and how she goes through the farming process. And then I would definitely look into Chatpool. They're doing some really interesting stuff with kind of an experiential research center that they just I think they raised like $1.5 million or something to do that. And also getting into kind of the animal feed sector. And then, yeah, if you do a quick Google search, you're going to find all sorts of stuff. You're going to find that Nestle and PepsiCo are researching this and behavioral adoption and when people are going to kind of tip over into making this totally mainstream. Um, yeah.
Excellent. And then maybe non-insect related, what's a book that you might recommend to our listeners? Something that's either impacted you recently or that you always come back to?
Okay, I just finished this one. Has coffee stains all over it. Let My People
Oh,
Go
let my people go
Survey.
surfing.
Huge fan of Yvon Chouinard and his business structure, and that was amazing. I feel like I would be a really good employee at Patagonia. I also just finished Who's a Pie? James Nestor, Breathe. That one I feel like has impacted
Mm,
my life daily. If I can remember to breathe, I actually feel like my experience is much better every single day. And I just picked up Where the Crawdads Sing for fun, kind of a natural world connection for me.
excellent. And next one for you, maybe speaking of things you do daily, what's a morning routine daily habit, something that you feel like you absolutely have to stick to, if anything?
Absolutely have to stick to nothing. I'm very flexible human being. I'm not kind of
Mm,
regimented like that. But my favorite days are when I'm able to wake up early, go to bed a little earlier, and in those dark moments before my kid wakes up, I enjoy the experience of my coffee and starting to kind of get an early jump on the day instead of a late end. I really enjoy waking up in the dark when I'm able to do it. Sometimes I have to honor that I need more sleep though, and any parent will know that. But yeah, something about the quiet, dark part of the morning where my mind is so sharp and focused. And I really love being able to capitalize on that.
love it. And last one for you, Kate. What's maybe one piece of advice that you leave our listeners with? These folks are social entrepreneurs like you, change makers, trying to leave the world a better place than they found it.
Yeah, don't give up. If you really believe in what you're doing and you're passionate about it, you won't fail. You'll just pivot and make it what it needs to be. I think that
Mm,
many people give up and that's why businesses fail. And like we were talking about those hard days earlier, just don't give up. You're not going to have a successful business if you do.
excellent. All right, Kate. And finally, where should folks keep up with you? You mentioned the website. Is there anywhere else that they should keep up with you in orchestra?
Yeah, orchestraprovisions.com is the website. I'm on LinkedIn, both personally and with Orchestra. I am on Instagram, Orchestra Provisions, Facebook, Orchestra Provisions. And hopefully we will be creating we have a TikTok. Hopefully we'll be utilizing that soon. And I mentioned the YouTube channel as well.
Great. We'll have all things orchestra and Kate Stoddard linked up at the show post at socialentrepreneurship.fm. Thank you, Kate.
Well, thank you so much.